Hey there, welcome to the Drawing Codex. In this video, I want to address the question, do you need to learn to draw quote unquote properly in order to go on to draw manga or some other heavily stylized type of art that you might see in video games or anime or cartoons, etc. Do we need to learn to draw like Da Vinci or the old masters? Do we need to master all of those sort of old school traditional drawing techniques in order to progress and draw some of this stuff that's sort of more current, more contemporary and cool? This is what I want to talk about in this video. Spoiler alert, the answer is no, you don't. I think that the most important thing to pay attention to is that we get better at what we continually do. You will get better at drawing cartoony stuff if you do a lot of that, and you will get better at drawing a lot of realistic stuff like the old masters if you do that. And really, it's most important for you to spend the time doing what you actually want. But I have a lot more to layer on top of that, and a lot more ammunition that you can potentially use to fire back at people in your life who tell you that you need to do this, that, and the other in order to draw manga, etc. Let's jump in, get started. Welcome to the Drawing Codex again. My name's Tim McBurney, and here on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from your imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, I certainly fell afoul and sort of ran into this advice early on. So, firstly, if you're sitting there and maybe you're in high school or you're thinking about, hey, can I draw stuff for a living, or how do I go about becoming, a professional comic book artist? What do I need to do? Just know that people have been telling, like young people, often teachers in high schools who don't really know any better, have been telling their students and young kids, you need to do X, Y, Z in order to draw manga or any of this kind of stuff. You need to learn to draw like Leonardo da Vinci. You need to study the old masters. Don't do that cartoony stuff. People have been doing this for quite some time, and I now make a lot more money drawing that cool stuff. And I didn't learn to draw like Michelangelo or Da Vinci, and that type of drawing is really not something I've ever focused on. And yeah, look, I make more money than most of those teachers who were telling me what I could or couldn't do or what's possible. So what I want to do in this video is just unpack this a little bit more and share with you my advice for what works. Again, I've been teaching drawing to people who go on to get jobs in the entertainment industry for, over 10 years now. So I have a lot of experience with this. But there is some truth to that concept, building a foundational sort of drawing sort of skill base. But it's more complicated than just saying you need to draw properly, right? There's a lot more nuance to it. So what I want to share with you is, again, demystifying some of these concepts, sharing a little bit of my experience, and again, I'll also give you some advice and tips at the end for how you can actually go about using these ideas and what are some things you can kind of focus on to get better at drawing stylized things. But what I want to talk about in the beginning is just the general idea that we get better at what we continually do. This is really the bedrock of how I sort of approach this, and I think it's super valuable if you're starting to learn a physical-based skill like drawing. So my take on this is pretty simple. Fundamentally, I think that drawing has more in common with physical activities, things like dance or martial arts or sport. We draw with our body. You may think we draw with our hand and that it's sort of more of an intellectual thing, but it's much more akin to learning to ride a bike. We're using our entire body to draw, and we're syncing up a lot of these subconscious, unconscious processes, and a lot of complicated stuff is happening there. But we need to move away from the idea of this being sort of an intellectual pursuit. Really, it is just a matter of practice at its core. There are things, as I said, that I'll share later on where we can build our foundation, and that will help no matter what style you use. But the concept of saying, hey, you need to study and learn to draw properly so that you can then just magically transfer those skills over to drawing something like manga is complete garbage. It is just a dumpster fire of bad advice. Now, I think this applies more specifically to things that are heavily stylized Or again, if you really actually do want to draw stylized comics, it's so important in all of these entertainment industries to really understand that the value you provide and the way that you make money or entertain people or engage with an audience and just kind of make stuff that's going to move people is to communicate your deeper feelings and the subtleties of your emotion and your stories and your ideas through your art. And there's no objective measure as to what works and what doesn't. Now you can see this by the frustration that typical art teachers have with something like manga. And I found this very interesting because, again, I grew up reading, your sort of like typical manga that was sort of introduced in the 90s to the sort of Western market. Your things like sort of Akira and your sort of Dragon Ball and that kind of stuff. I wasn't a big Dragon Ball kid. That was a bit sort of later than me. But again, I spent a lot of time being really, really into this. And I had a lot of teachers kind of say, look, that's just not real art, but everyone reads it. And I think that's where you need to see the first disconnect is often what will happen is you have, again, the well-meaning art teacher will kind of say, hey, don't study manga. And again, this is a slight different sort of approach to it, but it's a good example of how the advice is not that good. And, there's no money to be made in entertainment design or drawing cartoony stuff that's kind of more fun. You need to learn to draw properly, or, you need to do something that's, not silly like that. And then that same person will go and buy their child a copy of Naruto. Or they'll be going and, their child will be begging them for some Fortnite credits or something like that. Can I have the credit card so I can buy stuff in Fortnite? And they're just not making the connection that everything around them is designed by people and manufactured by people, and that there's lots of jobs and opportunities doing that. So I think there's often a disconnect between just the general idea of why something like manga or stylized art works and how it sort of works, and the fact that it does work, and often the fact that manga, which a lot of people consider to be, in many cases, to be like sort of poorly drawn, can be very moving and very emotional, and that a lot of people like it across the world. So, you have your sort of classic sort of manga things like something like One Piece, I think is a good example, right? Because, the drawings are like, from an objective kind of Western standard of trying to, again, draw like Leonardo, they're not good, right? They're very abstract. They're very simplified, but there's a lot of emotion there. And studying to draw, structurally or properly isn't really going to help you get that emotion across. The real important thing is creating these pictures that make people feel something. And at its core, that's the most important thing. And to bring it back to what I said initially, you get good at what you do. And if you don't get really good at making people feel stuff with your kind of simple, quick, cartoony drawings, you're never going to actually get to the point where you're able to do the job that you're trying to do effectively. So the thing you need to practice is often found within you doing the actual thing that you want to do. And you can get as good as you want at rendering and structural drawing, but if you can't connect with your audience through your characters, no one will care at all. So that's why I think it's always important to actually practice doing the thing that you want to do, because you'll find when you do that you're picking up the skills that are relevant and not the ones which are irrelevant. Just quickly, if you're wanting to learn how to create your own line and color comic book, manga, bande dessinée style, where we create worlds with simple line and color, you can check out my free quick start guide. It goes over my process and my advice to people who are beginning or just want to create a simple, reliable line and color comic book process in Photoshop. As I said, it's free. The link will be in the description. So at its core, the thing you have to remember is you only get one life to live. Now, I know that sounds overly dramatic and a bit sort of deep, but not all artists who are very, very at a high level get to do everything well. someone who's going to spend their entire life drawing comics is not necessarily going to be good at painting a still life. Personally, I don't, and I have never really done a lot of, traditional painting with oils. My still life and drawing from reference ability is very poor relative to my other work. And, when I do sort of life drawing, again, what I would find is that my life drawing would get better as my general sort of skills got better. So when I was doing life drawing, very early on, my life drawing wasn't very good. And then I would not do life drawing for 5 years. But I'd be working on comics full time, and I'd go back and my life drawing would be significantly better, right? Just life drawing and doing a lot of these traditional proper drawing things are a good way for you to test your skills. And if you like doing them, by all means do them. There's nothing wrong with any of this. But no one who's reading your comic or playing the video game that you designed is going to care whether or not you can sort of paint a still life or paint a plein air landscape. Those things are only valuable to you insofar as they help you enjoy yourself or build your skill set so that you can apply that skill set to the work that you're actually doing. At the end of the day, no one cares whether you can draw a still life or do life drawing models or paint like Leonardo. They only care about the thing that they're actually looking at that you created. If you're looking at this from an economic standpoint, the only thing that matters to you getting a job or getting published or any of these things which you might sort of consider success is your ability to provide value within a production chain, or your ability to build an audience and essentially create your own value chain. In all of those cases, what you're doing is you are being useful. You're helping out a team, or you're creating a product, right, as an artist or an author that other people are going to be able to consume. And that product or that value you provide in the chain is the only thing that matters. And as long as you can do that, then the rest of your artistic skill building is kind of for yourself. And I think a lot of artists who, do work professionally obviously do build their skills, and they do plein air painting, and they do a lot of life drawing, and they really enjoy it, and that's great. And, certainly that's just not something I've been interested in. And I think you'll find there's not a huge correlation between, those kind of ancillary sort of skills and someone being sort of really, really good at their kind of main skill that they're kind of known for or that they do as a job. Again, you see just as many artists who spend all day, every day, painting traditionally and really getting involved in that sort of grassroots traditional drawing sort of mindset as people who just sort of draw their cool stuff, and they don't ever do that. It's really personal, but in my experience, there's not a huge correlation between the skill level there or necessarily the success people have. One of the things that I think you can really, really do to help this is look at Naoki Urasawa's Man Ben documentary, which you can sort of find around the internet, right? And that's where you have Naoki Urasawa, who is a very, very famous, very, very talented manga artist in Japan, basically goes around and does this thing where they sort of film various manga artists in their natural environment, working on their pages, and they interview them, and you get to see kind of how they think a little bit. And I think one of the things that's interesting about that specifically, and the reason I kind of base this, very much around that manga idea, because that concerns a lot of people, is that you really see that all of those artists approach that in a very, very different way, and it's very personal. And some of them are going to be studying those technical foundational things, and some of them aren't. But at its core, what they're most of the time focusing on is the emotion and the story in the page. It's the thing that people actually care about. And I think that's really, really important. Again, if you want some sort of inspiration for people just being different and divergent, and how people can find success through applying skills in a variety of different ways with different processes, again, it's really, really interesting to see how personal a lot of manga artists actually are in the way they attack the page. Obviously, depending on how realistic or form-based or structural you want your drawing to be, studying in a more sort of traditional way, or learning to, really push your anatomy, push your foundational structural drawing, that will help, right? So if you think about your sort of classic, again, like one piece again, there's not a lot of sort of structure there. There's a lot of certainly like heavily sort of talented art going on, right? I'm not diminishing or linking up structure with success or skill, but just as a different sort of skill set you build will sort of help you draw different things. If you look at something like Haruki Sumura's Blade of the Immortal, right? It's a much more sort of traditional model of anatomy, right? It's a lot more realistic. There's a level of shading that you're not going to see in a lot of those other mangas, right? Like something again like Toriyama's Dragon Ball, right? Again, it's your sort of classic example. So and I always sort of bring up the idea of Akira as well, right? Again, lots and lots of sort of structural, technical drawing, very, very high level of skill. So why does this happen? Why do people say you need to learn to draw properly or in any particular way before you can draw manga or before you can draw stylized? Well, I think there's a variety of reasons. And we can just speculate, but I think in many cases, people just don't really know. They're just sort of repeating stuff. It just sounds good. It sounds like something. And again, I think a lot of people are annoyed when you have a medium like manga that has very simple sort of cartoony drawings that everyone likes. It's kind of, it's like the equivalent of a Picasso, right? Everyone's like, oh, I could do that. That's not hard. So there's this sort of feeling that maybe working on these kind of technical things, right, that are sort of difficult, your technical rendering and those kind of things is really going to, because it's sort of hard and because it's sort of traditional, has this history that people understand, maybe it's got more value. Another thing that you could potentially think of for why this happens is it does push you out of your comfort zone, which is often the goal of people in a traditional educational standpoint. If people can push you out of your comfort zone, again, drawing cartoony or stylized, and sort of push you into their comfort zone, i.e., learning to draw or understanding art in the way that the teacher understands it, it gives them more authority and it kind of changes that relationship. You're now playing on their court by their rules, and they can't sort of be swayed by a lot of the subjective stuff that you might have or your deeper understanding of the medium. So it sort of avoids them being unable to teach you anything because basically you're doing something completely different. Now, you could view this from an analytical standpoint as being pretty sort of bad, right? That's like an evil thing for teachers to do. You just got to remember, everyone who's teaching in a school, every art teacher that you've kind of had it's a person with a job who's trying to survive. They're trying to feed their family or do the thing that they're doing. And it's quite challenging to teach things in a large sort of classroom environment. You typically find teachers in that situation are just kind of trying to survive. And it's really just mostly important not to pay any attention to them if they don't know what you're trying to do or how to help you, right? Just focus on finding people who have done that before and can help you. It's that simple. So the other reason that this typically happens is, as I said, there are foundational concepts that if you're trying to draw in a very representational way will really help you. Things like perspective and rendering are boring, and people will universally have a fairly high degree of resistance to learning it. I have a lot of experience with this. It's quite a challenging thing to convince people that they need to learn. And I think there is just a general ethos within sort of art education that you kind of do need to put a lot of pressure on people to get them to kind of understand how important those foundational sort of more traditional concepts are. However, the problem is that, again, as I've said, I just don't think there's a strong correlation between doing those exercises and, being able to sort of transfer it directly over. It's really important to understand how those skill transfers actually happen. So again, a good example I use is life drawing. And I'll give you another example in a second, talking about sort of boxes and cubes and sort of technical rendering. But if you spend a lot of time life drawing, you will get better at life drawing. And I've seen this happen a lot with students. They do a lot of life drawing. They get quite good at life drawing. But it's almost like, you build just one muscle. You're just sort of building the bicep, right? you often find that it kind of becomes useless, right? It becomes good at that one thing, but from an integrated sort of physical health and conditioning point of view, it's completely useless. And it's very similar with that art stuff. I've seen people get very good at technical perspective. I've seen people get, good at one thing or another. And if they're not applying those foundational skills that they're learning through that exercise to the work that they actually want to do, what I find is they just get better at the life drawing, they just get better at the technical perspective exercises, and when they go to apply it, it's very difficult for them. And it's almost the more of the technical exercises you do in isolation, the more of them you do, and the better at it you get without applying it, the harder it becomes to apply it in the future, because you're just not integrating that foundational knowledge into the thing you actually want to do. So there's a huge risk to just sort of smashing these technical exercises a lot. They're different things, and you need to focus on the thing that you want to do. Again, pretty simple. So for instance, if we look at the boxes as an example, this is where you render boxes by drawing the perspective, calculating the shadows, and you render them, and your sort of goal is to try and understand how the physics of light work, right? Understand those foundational skills. Now, I've drawn in a cartoony style for my entire life, and I've always wanted to draw comics. I've never been interested in drawing realistically at all, but I resisted doing these technical exercises for a long time. Now, I was sort of able to get professional work, right? I started drawing comics while still sort of really ignoring that foundational stuff. And, that can be done. And a lot of people go down that route. They just sort of practice and practice and practice, and they get better and better and better. And you kind of figure these things out, and you kind of learn a little bit here and there. But, when I really did study that technical perspective and rendering and the shadow casting and understanding the properties of light, it made a huge impact on the art that I was doing. It was a major, major benefit to me. And I can sort of see in many degrees as my sort of general drawing ability has gotten better and my rendering ability, again, I'm now able to go back and, do those boxes a little bit better even still. So there's huge benefit to understanding foundational concepts of art and applying them to a style that, is something that does work. But you can also get there through just sort of sheer doing it, right? The thing you can't do is just study the boxes and the perspective and just, do that day in, day out, and then hope to magically one day be able to apply that to a style. In my experience, that just sort of doesn't work, and I haven't seen a lot of people finding a lot of success with that. As I said, my general recommendation is no matter what you're doing, if you want to do concept art for video games, if you want to do detailed illustration for book covers, if you want to draw comics that are hyper detailed and take you a week to do a page, or you want to be doing 20 pages in a week in a manga style, the most beneficial thing you can do is spend the majority of your time practicing that. In the beginning, it'll kind of suck. You won't be as good as you want, but you'll be learning the foundational skills for what matters when you're actually doing it. Again, as just a number I sort of pick out of the air, I'd say, you want to be sort of around 80% doing the thing you want to do, 20% sort of studying. And again, that's just my general advice. And what you'll find is if you're regularly creating art in a comic book style, and you go and learn a bit of perspective, you'll just naturally be able to kind of apply it just daily. Like, oh, I learned that thing. I'm doing this panel. Maybe I'll try do that. Maybe I'll try do this little trick. Oh, I read a book about composition. Oh, maybe I'll try that on this panel. Maybe I'll do this here. Maybe I'll do that there. You'll be constantly folding in little things. The key here is to remember that you are in control of your own destiny and your own career and your own life. As I said, I had many teachers tell me that I needed to do X, Y, Z in order to get good at drawing, in order to get good at, the thing that I wanted to do. And often they weren't telling me to just keep doing the thing that I wanted to do because they were in a teaching environment and they wanted me to do their assignment, right? That's what they cared about. And in most cases, I failed those things. I didn't do well. I didn't do well in illustration class when I was, out of high school. I didn't, do that well in a lot of those environments. And again, as I said, I was able to sort of figure out how to do it. And a lot of that is just through taking responsibility for it and understanding that you or me, we're in control of our own careers and our own destinies, and you have to trust yourself and try and figure out how to do the thing that you want to do, and make sure you try and find people in life to take advice from who are actually doing the thing that's very close to what you want to do. So again, even my advice is probably going to be slightly different to someone who is just purely doing comics. And this is why I think the manga example is really good, because it's so much in that case about connecting with your reader, connecting with the audience, making them feel things through the subtle, features of the face, even though it's simple. If you get one of those lines off, it's not quite the right expression to match the balloon. That stuff is so important. It's so important when you're drawing comics. If you get too locked in structure or rendering and you miss the subtle, expression line, it doesn't connect with the reader. It falls flat and the page is low value, right? You're not actually doing the thing you want to do. If I go and watch the Man documentary by the Naoki Urasawa, I see a lot of people just focusing on story and the subtleties and redrawing those things and really trying to get it. And I didn't really hear a lot of people talking about how important the foundation was, how important structural drawing was, how important life drawing was. Certainly some of them do, and you can see from their art that they're very interested in that. Again, there's no prescription for you doing exactly what you want to do. You have to figure it out yourself, and a lot of this is about experimentation, playing with it, and seeing, how do the things that you do in your comics or your work, how do they make people respond? How can you sort of tweak those dials and make sure that the art you're doing has more emotion? I think you'll find in the long run that's one of the most important things to focus on. Technical drawing ability is really, really important. It will help you if you need to draw structurally. And again, if you don't need to draw structurally, it probably won't help you that much. Again, focusing on the emotion of the characters will help you a lot more. But there's definitely no rule that I can point to. There's no evidence, there's no science behind the idea that you need to draw properly before or at the beginning or as part of learning manga. If you want to do something, just practice doing it and you'll naturally get better. That's how we're wired when it comes to physical-based learning modalities or acquiring physical-based skills. It's more like riding a bike, learning to dance, learning to fight or do martial arts or learning to throw balls than it is learning some intellectual thing. You've just got to do it. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Hopefully this is interesting. If you've had people tell you that you need to do XYZ if you want to draw manga, let me know in the comments. It'd be good to hear your thoughts and what your experience is with this. It helps me out to understand where you're coming from. But other than that, we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.